So kind of the fit for Atlantic Woodworks, the program here is that we take the amazing work that is completed by FP Innovations and Wood Science and Technology, a lot of the research that has been done, and we bring that to the decision makers in government, sometimes in the National Research Council, obviously, and we help push the agenda to speed up these regulatory changes, to educate and inform on the environmental, economic, and performance benefits of wood construction. So that's really how we fit into the mix. So before I continue, I'm going to talk about mid-rise construction and wood use in there and the opportunity for that. But what is mid-rise construction? Can anyone just take a guess? What is mid-rise? How many stories? What's the range? 3 to 7, pretty close. Yeah, it's 4 to 11 stories. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about mid-rise. Some people say, 5 to 10. Let's just go with 4 to 11 as per the Webster Dictionary up there. So let's now look at the different types of buildings that fit in the mid-rise construction category. So this first type of building, did anyone guess what that is? Yeah, light wood frame, dimension lumber construction. Then we have, take a look at this, can anyone see this? Post and beam, mass timber. Another look at some mass timber. Then we have, post and beam elements with mass timber. So these could be, glulam beams or any other types of engineered post. And then hybrid structures. So those are really the 5 different types. On David Fell's slide, he showed 4, but this is kind of how Atlantic Woodworks likes to classify the structural systems. So now when we think about these 5 different types of buildings that have the capabilities to construct anywhere from 4 to 11 stories, let's get some examples of these capabilities. So this is light wood frame. This is about the highest you'll see a light wood frame dimension lumber building is 6 stories high. And this is coming through with the regulatory changes in the 2015 National Building Code. Okay, so you'll see 6 stories. Post and beam. This was a building that was shown again on one of David Fell's initial slides. This is the largest post and beam structure in North America. It's 23.5 meters high in downtown Vancouver. It was built in 1802. The bottom beam in that building is 20 by 20 inches. Awesome structure. Then when we look at CLT, Chewy just talked about this, all cross-laminated timber. This is unsprinklered construction. So this is not sprinklered. There's 23 units, I believe, in this 9-story building. Then when we look at post and beam and mass timber, this has been talked about a lot today. The Wood Innovation and Design Center in Prince George, BC. This is now the tallest wood building in North America, 29.5 meters. So think of those capabilities. It's really pushing the boundaries. And then the 18-story structure that Chris had talked about, Stephen, where you'll see steel I-beams as part of the structural support system with glulam and mass timber. Okay, so now we see the different types of structural systems and their capabilities. Now let's take a look at the regulatory system. Does the building code actually specify the difference between a 2x4 and a mass timber panel? No, it doesn't. It takes everything, and because it burns, they call it combustible construction, they lump it into one category. So our regulatory system is not currently, the governing one here in New Brunswick, the 2010 National Building Code, is saying that a mass timber panel is the same as a 2x4. Actually, through consulting the code many times with some of the technical inquiries that we get from engineers and architects, this is one of the differences that we have found in the code. And it's specifying between heavy timber and combustible construction. And it says, in a very confusing way, I'll just shorten it, if you have to have a 45-minute or higher fire rating, you cannot use heavy timber construction. Well, the National Research Council, they did a fire test. And this is a CLT panel, and they burned it. They had fire officials, decision makers from all over Canada come in and watch, and I'm sure people are like, oh my god, this is going to fail. So they burnt it. They burnt it for 2 hours. I think they got pizza, and that was the damage. So when you think about it, the capabilities that a lot of these materials have, are certainly underestimated within the governing regulations today. So I don't know about you, I see it as a challenge, but I see it as a great opportunity. It's just the start for our industry. So Canada's now on the tail end of the largest scale of research since World War II. And because there's been a lot of interesting buildings constructed around the world, in BC in 2009, they were building 6-story buildings. We have these mass timber products coming on the marketplace. We have advancements in firefighting technology and other construction materials. It was time that we revisit this. And the NRC, FP Innovations, who really completed the brunt of the research, kind of made the recommendation that the current code doesn't evaluate the technological capabilities of even light wood frame construction. So therefore, the recommendation was to move forward to 5 and 6 stories. This is nothing new. In 1941, in the first building code, as I showed you in the post and beam example, there was a 7-story high post and beam building. So it's nothing really new. There's combustible 6-story buildings downtown St. John, Halifax. I'm sure that there's some here in Moncton I just don't even know about. But in 53, they decided, well, there's less and less of this post and beam larger construction around. It doesn't really have the structural capabilities of our 2x4s. And it's a much more rigorous process than that. But it was determined that the safest height was 4 stories for combustible construction. And now that is changing. And there are asterisks there. We'll talk about that in a second. So how does this fit? Where is the way forward? When you look at some of the market statistics and demographics here in Atlantic Canada, we're seeing that today 50% of us live in urban areas. In another 26 years, it's going to be around 75%. So what that does is it puts a lot of pressure on existing infrastructure. It's going to need more buildings to be created and remodeled. So there's change on the horizon. We're going to have to start building and rejuvenating our urban cores. But when we look at the way that we construct, and now there's never been so much emphasis on sustainable development with an eye on environmental impact. So again, this is a perfect storm. With this urbanization movement, we have a conscious effort to build sustainably. So let's talk about the Atlantic residential construction. About 95% of that market is light wood frame. And the reason for that is because it's economical. Non-residential, it's the polar opposite. So, speaking with municipalities in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland, it's amazing. When they think about a community center or an arena that they're building, they immediately default to concrete and steel. So it's also about how we got to change the way that we critically think about how we are designing these buildings. And the non-residential market compared to the residential construction market, it's about 10 times bigger here in Atlantic Canada. So that's a huge piece of pie of opportunity for the wood industry here. This was touched on too as well, but the way that we are building with our cities and how we are renewing our infrastructure as the urbanization movement increases is it's done with steel and concrete. And these are great materials. I'm not here to say that they are not. They have really caused our society to develop the way that it has today. So, but when you look at it from an environmental perspective, and this is a Canadian statistic, steel production accounts for about 3% of carbon contribution per annum, concrete's around 5%. So that's almost 10%. And the challenges that designers are faced with today are 1, how do we reduce greenhouse gases? And 2, how do we store them? When we look at the environmental impact, again, on carbon contribution per annum, we often think of the transportation industry. This is a North American statistic. We think, well, there's planes in the sky, there's sea freighters out at sea, but really it's the building industry that has the largest contribution to global carbon. And this is construction, demolition, remodel. It encapsulates a lot of different industries. So this is where the largest impact is on reducing greenhouse gases and storing our carbon, is through the building industry. This is where wood enters the picture. You know, I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm not going to talk too much about the environmental benefits, but you know, we can grow our own buildings. Wood is good, and to, you know, the way it behaves in buildings, it kind of is weird. So it's there are some challenges with that you know, our program is assisting the Atlantic designers with. And again, it stores carbon. So if that tree, you know, even when you burn that tree or it falls down, that carbon is returned back to the system through the carbon cycle. But when you go out in the forest and you cut down that tree, convert it into a building product, and it goes into a building, that provides us with sequestration throughout the lifespan of that structure. The tools that we have as an industry, the North American forest industry is actually the only third-party certified environmental product declaration piece of information to support, you know, all the accolades that I had mentioned there. It's basically the nutritional fact sheet on the back of a bag of chips for what you're eating, but it pertains to environmental impact. And it helps get points on projects. As we saw today, there is one for cross-laminated timber as well. So this is a huge step in the right direction, you know, to take the things that I'm saying and actually putting them into practice and promote the environmental benefits. So where are these opportunities in mid-rise construction? Well, it's from 4 to 6 stories. Light wood frame is the most economical. When we look at a lot of the existing development models in Atlantic Canadian city centers, we see this. So this is Fairview Knoll in Moncton, New Brunswick. This is Hanwell, New Brunswick. You know, I was actually in Fredericton recently just driving. I couldn't believe the subdivisions that were developing. It's unbelievable. But what this does is when we look at existing downtown cores, it puts a lot of pressure on them in the wrong way, because you have these sprawling neighborhoods, and then in the center, meeting in between, you see these, you know, concrete jungles developing where you have your Home Depot, your Costco, and it pretty much makes the existing downtown core obsolete. A lot of these developments too, they don't really have the luxuries of single-family homes. Land costs are going up, so you know, your neighbors, you could throw a stone to them. It's just the luxuries aren't necessarily there, and it causes a lot of strain on the public services as well. So how do we, you know, these people pay less taxes, how do we provide the services to them? So this change is not only offering a lower cost construction option to industry. In BC, where they've been building these 6-story buildings since 2009, they're constructing them at about 10 to 15% less compared to concrete and steel of a similar scale. So not only is it offering a lower cost construction option, which increases the availability of affordable housing, but it really does increase the tax base of the municipality. It can rejuvenate existing municipal cores. These buildings can be constructed of mixed-use classification. So, you know, you could literally live in your grocery store and just go down the elevator and buy your produce for the day. So it is a very sustainable model to satisfy the changing urbanization demographics and, you know, stimulate industry at the same time. So here are just some of the general benefits themselves. Suiting aging demographics. People don't want to plow their driveway anymore. They don't want to cut their grass. You know, they just want to move into a unit and pay the strata fee and have everything looked after. Self-explanatory. Now, the industry benefits here, you know, we talked a lot about prefab, so you're going to have better quality building. I see some prefabricators here in the audience, so it's a huge opportunity for them. Support sustainable design and decrease construction option. So other jurisdictions throughout Canada see this. Here in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and PEI, we don't have this option yet because we are still on the 2010 building code. The 2015 has been published, but it just kind of has to go through, the political process of adoption. We pushed for speedy adoption, but never before has it happened in Atlantic Canada where smaller provinces have acted ahead of the national code. Other jurisdictions throughout Canada, bigger provinces, they have the ability to adopt their own, so that's why they've been moving a bit quicker. But let's just take a look at the response from the rest of Canada. The city of Saskatoon, January 1st, they said we're going to build 6-story. Quebec, they've done some very interesting things. In October of 2012, they published a 5- and 6-story guide. If you built a building to this design guide, it was acceptable. They have a wood charter, similar to the Wood First resolution, but it's not as forceful. It's that you must give wood an honest attempt. A lot of the times in our regulations, as I pointed out, we're restricted and wood is not treated equally. So this is a very progressive charter for the Quebec government to start to get designers to try and design with wood. And now they have, this is the highest acceptable prescriptive solution in any Canadian jurisdiction is a 12-story mass timber building. And as Chewy had mentioned, that may be in the 2020 code. The city, or the province of Alberta, it was initiated actually by the city of Calgary. The city of Calgary is growing faster than New York City. Well, maybe not now, but it was. So a lot of the motivation of these different areas have been fueled by different things. City of Saskatoon has been more driven by, we want the same competitive options as the other parts of Canada. We need to reinvent some of our downtown cores. Quebec, it's quite industry related. Alberta, I think that they're also industry driven. Ontario, again with developers. City of Calgary to keep up with development. And BC, was quite political. So they're really positioning themselves. It's amazing, some of the structures. I would, if you ever have the opportunity to go out there, I would certainly suggest it. As Stephen and I were talking, he said that in North America, the province of Vancouver is certainly the most progressive. So I guess I don't really need to touch on that. Talking about economic stimulus for a province like New Brunswick, the interesting thing here is that there's been a gap in development. So with combustible construction limited to 4 stories and concrete buildings really only becoming feasible to construct when they get around the 8-story mark, there's been this interesting gap that really hasn't unlocked the potential. And having these 6-story combustible structures, lower cost construction options now available, it is creating extra buildings. So we have the steel and concrete industry saying, well, it's cutting into our market share, but in a lot of cases, it's just opening up another feasible options, and these buildings need foundations, and they need certain non-combustible elements. So in BC alone, the 6-story change in 2009 has contributed to about $2.8 billion in extra construction. They've had over 300 successful projects. Here is some of the developments. I went to school at UBC. I graduated in 2010, and when I went back in 2012, these buildings were being built. All of mixed-use classification, so your commercial spaces, your daycares, your residential up top. They're getting so good at it that they can build about a floor a week. So what could we expect? Just very quickly, the 2010 code in Group C, so this is multi-residential. We could only build 4 stories, besides BC was doing it back in 2009. But as you can see, not only prescriptively can we construct 5- and 6-story, but the floor area is increasing. So it's increased by about 20% before you need a firewall. Group D, business and personal services. So your office buildings, some of your commercial spaces. These are now what you can construct 5- and 6 stories. What's not permitted? Don't build any jails, hockey arenas. It's a bit of common sense here. Storage garages are about the only exception in the other classifications of buildings. And as I had mentioned, it's mixed use. So where is the industry opportunity here? Well, looking at the construction statistics from BC, where they've had 300 successful projects, some of the technical advisors there in the Woodworks program have done a really good job at seeing what board footage of material went in. And on average, it looked at about 50 different structures. It's about 1.3 million board feet in your average 6-story building. So the average Atlantic Canadian sawmill, this is high, so it's a conservative measure, produces about 100,000 board feet a day. So generally we can say that a 6-story building can operate a sawmill for 13 days. So to put that in to another perspective, that's 29 B trains of lumber. So this is more just framing. This isn't necessarily your engineered wood products, your millwork, your trims. So that's a substantial stimulus to industry. Economic impact. This is looking at 2015 non-residential investments for the province of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and Labrador. I know that a lot of you are just not selling here in New Brunswick. You're looking beyond. As you can see, we say that we have about 5% of the non-residential market. These are the annual investments for 2015. So it works out that there's well over $1 billion in maximum opportunity for the non-residential industry. Jobs. This number does float around and change quite a bit, but look at what New Brunswick, look at what they employ. And 35% direct. But the most interesting thing is that of these jobs, 70% of them are rural. And when those ones go away, they're the hardest for anyone to replace. Forest contribution to gross domestic product. New Brunswick is higher than that of British Columbia when we look at 2013 statistics. So this industry is the most important to the province of New Brunswick compared to any other province in Canada. So it is important that we support that and we diversify and we stabilize. So that's again what the Atlantic Woodworks program and the work of many of you others out there are trying to do. There's an extended degree of vulnerability to have your eggs all in one basket and ship to one market. About 75% of all of the forest products that are produced in Atlantic Canada end up going to the US. So it makes us very susceptible to things beyond our control, like currency, any phytosanitary barriers. And with the economic collapse in 2008, half of our softwood lumber producers were lost. And value added was majorly affected too. I had a family business. I was involved in a second generation family business, and we closed our doors as well. So it's important that we develop and have demand for regional wood products, and we supply them with locally produced products. Again, thank you very much.